Hey, greetings everyone. It's GleeCon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode, we read the prologue. I feel like I got a little bit jobbed on that one. They packaged it up. I don't know. I don't know why, because this story was plenty long enough as a novel without it. So the story we're looking at right now is Dawn of the Aspects, which was originally a 5-part ebook. So it was released in 5 sections of 5 chapters. Hey. The dog's like, oh, you're going to make a video? Time to immediately start the squeaking. So anyway, it was like a 5-part series. And then they put it together as this compilation, called it, I don't know if they called it Dawn of the Aspects, what the deal was, if it was already called that. And they tossed in that prologue. That prologue is a short story that was written significantly later, as we saw yesterday, like end of Cataclysm, maybe after Cataclysm was written, if not like right near the final patch. And a very long story, like a 40-page short story. And as you saw, like it's probably the longest thing other than like the game manuals that I've straight read. It was like an hour long. And while it was good, it's not written by the same author. It's only tangentially tied into what we're going to do. So anyhow, for now, we're going to actually start. We're going to read this entire book straight through because this is something we should have covered. He's looking back at me guilty. He knows exactly what he's doing. Then we have 2 decent-sized short stories to read. Maybe a little shorter than the one we just read yesterday. And also, the reason why, it's because it's so chronologically so much later, so we really could have put that off and read that as a standalone short story later. Actually 3 short stories. And then we can get back into the Paragon couple. We're not even going to read all of that. We're just going to read part of it. Before we have one last aside, which will be like 11 episodes. So this is 25 episodes or so. So it's going to take us a couple weeks to get through this. And next week I am taking a trip, so you guys will have to live without me for a few days. About 4 days or so hiatus. I'll be taking off from my normal daily uploading. All right, it's enough of the side chatter. Let's start with part 1. Chapter 1, which is called Wyrmrest. And here we go. His vague shadow passed over the immense structure below as he circled to land. Even though he had been here before, the scope and age of the stone temple and its surroundings still struck him hard. The temple rose several levels high, with each level built for a race obviously towering over humans and orcs. The rows of grooved columns that lined the outside from the circular base to the rounded top stood like an army of sentinels surveying every desolate direction of the chilling dragon wastes. Long fangs of ice draped the ancient edifice, and vicious cracks ran through many of the columns and curved archways. But despite the ravages of time and several fierce conflicts that had engulfed it, Wyrmrest stood defiant, eternal. It was to him a welcome contrast to the horrific and seemingly endless transformations plaguing the world of Azeroth. So right out there we know that we're jumping in Cataclysm. The others would already be here. He peered at the distant shrines to each of the great dragonflights, bronze, emerald, azure, ruby, and obsidian surrounding Wyrmrest. They were shrines without purpose now, the dragonflights in disarray or decimated. Even Wyrmrest, though it might stand 10 millennia more, risked being nothing but a relic of a time and hope long past. The great blue dragon sighed and began his descent. As he did, his gaze briefly shifted far beyond the temple and the shrines to the north, where unsettling mounds dotted the icy landscape. He quickly looked away. Each mound was the frost-encrusted corpse of a dragon. Some of the mounds dated thousands upon thousands of years back. The dragon wastes were the graveyard of hundreds of his kind, whatever their color. It was a grim reminder that even the mightiest of creatures were not invulnerable. The winged Leviathan focused again on his destination. Wyrmrest seemed to swell before his eyes. By the time he neared one of the entrances at the base, the dragon was dwarfed by the temple. He alighted and then, with one last glance around, stepped inside. The interior did nothing to lessen the sense of enormity, the first chamber rising more than 3 times the dragon's height. Torches that still stayed lit despite the millennia gave some weak illumination. Ancient carvings loomed over him, many of them of indistinct figures with some resemblance to humans or elves, and yet were clearly not. Whether these were meant to represent the Titans, the godlike beings who had brought order to the chaos and reshaped Azeroth to its current form, or had been carved with some other intent, the dragon did not know. This place had been built long before his time, indeed, long before the time of dragons in general. I wonder if we'll gain some insights into stuff like that in the next X-Pack coming up real soon. No one knew the reason for its construction, but long ago it had become the meeting place for the greatest of his kind, the Aspects. Guardians of not only all dragons, but all Azeroth. Here, over the millennia, the 5 champions had assembled to coordinate the actions of the dragonflights. Here, during the Nexus War, in which the aspect of magic had led the blue dragonflight in an attempt to purge Azeroth of all mortal spellcasters who did not bow to his utter control, the leaders of the 3 other dragonflights had created the Wyrmrest Accord, an annual gathering in which they discussed what courses of action to take in regard to the oft precarious future of the world. Here, after the War of the Ancients, when demons had invaded Azeroth and ancient Kalimdor had been sundered, 4 of them, Malygos at that time still very much included, had come to determine their next step to counter the treachery of one of their own. The last had become one of their predominant tasks, but even that long struggle paled against what had actually been their primary goal since the beginning, nothing less than preventing the hour of twilight when all life on Azeroth would become extinct. Also, that's an instant, I believe. The end times. That extraordinary victory had at last been achieved at the greatest of costs for the Aspects. Now, here, for the first time since this ancient edifice had been chosen as their meeting place, the 4 remaining former Aspects came not as the world's champions, but simply as themselves. The dragon descended into a gorge carved into the ice, arriving at the lowest, half-buried portion of the temple. He listened, but heard no voices rising from within. It was possible that he had arrived before the others after all. He considered departing the temple and finding a nearby place to wait until one of the others turned up. For even after reassurances from the others, he still felt that as the youngest it was not his place to be first among them in any manner, but finally proceeded. But as the scaled behemoth entered the lower level, he finally heard one of the others, Nosdormu. Trust the bronze dragon to still be the timeliest of them, even now, bum. What the other male said, the blue dragon could not make out. However, the reply of the one with whom Nosdormu spoke came clear. We shall wait until we are all here, a soft yet commanding female voice answered. Kalikos deserves as much respect in that regard as any of us. Hearing his name, the blue dragon surged forward. Not only was he not first, he had clearly kept the others waiting. I am here, the blue roared. He entered a wide circular chamber, the center of which contained a raised marble platform, reachable by steps at the northern and southern points of the compass. Each corner of the platform was also topped by a huge column. Nosdormu turned his sharp gaze to the newcomer, the gargantuan bronze dragon flanked by 2 females, equally imposing in size and majesty. The long, sleek emerald-green dragon to the bronze's right stared unblinking at the blue with rainbow-colored orbs. Ysera, once she of the dreaming, she for millennia of the ever-closed eyes, now never shut them even for an instant. She nodded to Kalikos, but did not speak. At Nosdormu's other side, a majestic crimson female took a few steps toward the blue. In size and girth, she outdid any of the 3, but there was a gentleness about her that belied her fearsome appearance. A long crest stretched down from her back to her tail, and the blue dragon knew that if she stretched her wings, their expanse would be wide enough to obscure her 2 companions. 3 other dragons of slightly lesser size bowed their heads at his arrival. Each of the 3 stood positioned on the wide platform behind the former aspect whose color they matched. These were among the most trusted, the most battle-tested of those who had served the champions. Caligos knew each well, from the swift and ready Cronormu, or Chromi, as she was referred to by those nearest her, to brave Merithra, daughter of Ysera. Of the three, though, he was probably most familiar with Crimson Devrastraws, he who had once been commander of Wyrmrest's defenses during the struggle against the Twilight's Hammer, the fanatical cult that had tried to hasten the end of Azeroth. I think Caligos is the one that's like in trouble during Legion. To get ahead of ourselves here. The latter trio remained quiet and in the background. They were here to listen. Their presence reminded him once again that he too should have been accompanied. The only problem was there had no longer been anyone left in the Nexus to do that.
"There is no need to fear, Caligos,"
the lead red dragon calmly responded to his outburst, her voice melodic, calming.
"We knew that you would be along shortly. Nosdormu merely expressed concern for you. Did you not, Nosdormu?" "As you say,"
the bronze replied vaguely. His voice bespoke age and wisdom, even though, like the others, he appeared in the fullness of life.
"You are too kind."
The blue bowed his long, crested head toward the elder dragons. Then to the crimson female added,
"Calig, if you please, Alexstrasza."
Nosdormu snorted, but Alexstrasza nodded.
"Calig, forgive me for forgetting your preferred, what do the younger races call it, nickname, but I thought you only liked its use when in humanoid form. Of late I've come to prefer it at all times."
Calig did not elaborate.
"Perhaps we should all have nicknames,"
Ysera interjected without a hint of sarcasm.
"After all, it is their world now. Indeed, I find I spend more time of late in a humanoid form than I do in this, my birth one. Perhaps that would be the best and quickest way to close our era."
Especially since they're stuck being quest givers all the time. I mean, her blunt words silenced the other three. After a moment clearly uncomfortable to all of them, Alexstrasza moved to take up a position at the very center of the wide dais. The other three followed suit, Nosdormu moving to the southern edge, Ysera to the east, and Calig to the north. The west, Neltharion's place, had remained empty since his ancient betrayal. The red dragon surveyed the others, and gazing up for a moment, she declared,
"Let this gathering of the Accord begin."
Once this pronouncement would have been accompanied by some magical spectacle, but such displays were a thing of the past. Fearsome these four behemoths might still be, but guardians of Azeroth, they were not. They had sacrificed their roles as aspects in order to vanquish once and for all the monstrous black dragon Deathwing. Deathwing, he who had once been their comrade, Neltharion, and who in his evil madness had nearly succeeded in bringing about the hour of twilight. So I wonder if all this stuff is precursoring to flashback, because I feel like this is a big leap from the prologue that we read to where we're at right now. That's a lot that's going to happen. They were still the aspects then. The end time had not been averted. I didn't play a lot when the Mists of Pandaria and the end of, like, I didn't play a lot towards the end of this, so this is a weaker area of my lore, which is why we're buffing up. It had been a worthy sacrifice, but Calig was well aware that in its wake it had left all four forever altered. Calig surreptitiously studied the Elder Three. He had come only lately into the role of aspect of magic, grudgingly accepting both it and rule over the blue dragonflight after the downfall of his predecessor in Lord Malygos. Malygos, also called the Spellweaver, had grown tired of what he considered the misuse of arcane magic by the lesser races, and had finally declared that such power was to be entrusted only to dragons and their allies. The Nexus War had swept across Azeroth and had ended only when, with the aid of Alexstrasza and a handful of her drakes, a band of heroes had entered the heart of his domain, the Nexus itself, and had regretfully put an end to both Malygos and his monstrous crusade. Seeking a new leader, the Blue Dragons had turned to the member of their flight who, through events, had proven to be the one whom they could trust most to lead, Calig. So that's like that's early raids for Wrath of the Lich King. The Blue waited, but no one spoke. Even Alexstrasza seemed uninterested in continuing beyond calling the Accord to order. The Lifebinder appeared to be waiting for one of the others to take control, something that neither Ysera nor Nosdormu showed the slightest inclination of doing. But others did. Growing more visibly impatient than even Calig felt, Chromie broke the silence. If I may be permitted, there is a matter of concern. The timeways appear to be in flux. It may have to do with when the dragon soul was seized. Nosdormu cut her off.
The timeways are no longer our concern. They are beyond my ability to control. From here on, the younger races, and the younger races alone, will deal with both them and whatever paths to the future they lead to.
Cronormu obviously wanted to say more, but instead nodded. However, as she withdrew, Ysera's daughter dared speak up.
Perhaps I speak out of turn also, but there have been rumors that the nightmare stirs in the Rift of Alm. It may be seeking a new puppet, another nightmare lord that will help it again reach from the Emerald Dream into the waking world.
We have discussed this, Ysera pointedly reprimanded the other green. The former aspect's expression momentarily changed.
I think we did. Yes, we did. The rift and the corruption still touching the Emerald Dream will be dealt with by the Druids. Yes, the Druids. The Night Elf Naralex has already led an effort that has seen the nightmare sealed off. The Druids will guard against the nightmare more ably than we can now.
The speech was far more focused, more concentrated, more concentrated one than those Calic had heard from Ysera shortly after the Green's loss of her aspect role and its powers. Then Ysera had seemed absent-minded and unable to articulate her thoughts well. Since that time, however, her mind had clearly made strides in regaining much of what it had lost. Marithra looked deflated.
As you say, Mother.
Once again an uneasy silence reigned over the assembly. Devrastraws, wiser than the other two subordinates, looked disinclined to add his own voice. Calic suddenly felt acutely aware of the lack of anyone at his own side. It was as if time had stopped. No one even moved. Finally, well aware that it was his youth in part that stirred his impatience beyond his ability to command, Calic blurted,
I would speak.
With only the mildest visible curiosity, the other Leviathans looked his way. A sense of intimidation washed over Calic, but he quickly recognized it as his own uncertainty, not any disdain on their part. His life, as tragic as much of it had been, was less than nothing compared to the combined suffering of these venerable beings. That he had been considered an equal even for a time still daunted him.
Well,
Ysera finally responded,
if you wish to speak, then you should speak. Simple enough.
Calic was a little taken aback by her directness. Ysera had been the dreamer. Now she was nothing but waste in dreaming. She saw nothing but waste in dreaming or even hesitating.
The contents of the Nexus. Is that all it is about?
She looked even less interested than before.
The concerns of any one dragonflight are its alone. You know that. Does your subject concern the rest of us in any way? Not directly. Not directly. Then it doesn't, which means that discussion is at an end. Indeed, there doesn't seem to be any relevant discussion thus far.
Turning to Alexstrasza, Ysera grumbled,
I told you, didn't I? I certainly remember wanting to. Yes, I did. I told you I thought it was a mistake even bothering to gather here, my sister. We have always met at the cycle of the twin moons. It would have been disrespectful not to.
Nosdormu snorted again.
Disrespectful to whom? Elune. The Mother Moon has her night elves to worship her. Disrespectful to the Titans or their servants, the Keepers. We do not even know if the Titans exist anymore. It is certainly not disrespectful to us. I agree with Ysera. This was a mistake. There is no point to the Accord anymore. If this gathering has any purpose to it, it should be to finally put the Accord to rest, and that each of us move on with our own problems.
Calic was stunned by the unexpected course of the brief conversation. He waited breathlessly for Alexstrasza to calm the other two down, but the Lifebinder did not argue. Indeed, Alexstrasza seemed to mull over Nosdormu's suggestion as if it had tremendous merit. The blue dragon abandoned his position, moving toward the center and in front of Alexstrasza as he faced the bronze.
But the Accord is not merely about us. It's become the backbone of all draconic interaction over the millennia. The Accord kept order among our flights, prevented catastrophe more than once. We knew that if we were united, there would always be hope. United, Ysera cut in. Yes, we have been very united over the millennia, have we not? Neltharion, Malygos.
She looked as if she intended to say more, but with an apologetic glance at Nosdormu, she quieted.
Do not leave me out,
The bronze grimly added. He stretched his wings.
Call him Murazond, Lord of the Infinite Dragonflight, if you like. But that accursed dragon was my far future self, and so I am to blame for his evils, just as Neltharion was to blame for what he later did as Deathwing.
Alexstrasza inserted herself at their center again.
Nay, Nosdormu, no one here finds fault with you for what you have not done. You fought alongside others against Murazond and altered that future forever. Had there been even the remotest blame on your part, it was erased with Murazond's undoing.
Kalik and Ysera dipped their heads in agreement. The bronze tail slowly slid back and forth, a sign of his gratitude for such words. Then his mood darkened again.
Yes, I fought my future self, when I had the power to fight. Now we are as any other dragon. The time of the aspects is past, and I say thus that the time of the Wyrmrest Accord is also.
Again, Kalik noted no disagreement from the sisters.
But the three of you are the combined wisdom of our kind. The aspects have always.
Ysera thrust her snout into his face.
We are not aspects, but the three of you are still. We understand your concern, Kalik,
Alexstrasza said with such clear pity that Kalik winced.
But our time is done, and Azeroth must look to other defenders.
As she finished, Nosdormu strode past them toward one of the exits. Ysera followed suit. Kalik could not believe what he was seeing.
Where are you going?
The bronze leviathan looked over his shoulder.
Home. We are done here. We should not have even bothered to have this gathering. He is correct on the last score,
the Lifebinder agreed reluctantly, and only then did Kalik realize that he had been thinking of all of them in terms of titles they themselves clearly no longer acknowledged. They were in their own eyes simply 3 dragons among many now.
Alexstrasza, surely you at least.
It was as if his mother stared down at him. The pity had been replaced by care.
Azeroth will survive without us. You who were thrust only so recently into all this. You will survive without us.
Alexstrasza looked to the departing bronze.
Nosdormu, a moment. We will meet once more in a month. If we are to dissolve the Accord, we shall do so with proper respect.
He paused, then glanced back.
You are correct. It does deserve the proper burial. Agreed. 1 month from this day.
The gargantuan red focused on her sister.
Ysera, I agree. It makes perfect sense.
Alexstrasza faced Kalik. So shocked that he was unable to speak, he vehemently shook his head.
3-1,
the female red murmured.
So it is decided.
Nosdormu had not even waited for her declaration, the bronze and his lieutenant already moving on. Ysera and her daughter were close behind. Alexstrasza watched them for a moment, then turned and with a grace incredible even for a dragon, slipped up behind Nosdormu and her sister. Devrastraz hesitated only long enough to give the blue a sympathetic expression before following her. Kalik had no choice but to follow or be left alone. Yet despite his youth and swiftness, by the time he reached the outside, the others were already in the midst of going their separate ways.
Please reconsider,
he roared, his plea echoing throughout the wastes. Kalik's mind was a whirl. He had actually come here with troubles of his own that he had hoped to discuss with one or more of the elder dragons, and instead he found himself trying desperately just to keep the one seemingly eternal accord together. Nosdormu spread his wings to their full span and took to the sky without so much as a last glance at the younger dragon. He was already a small dot when Ysera deigned to speak one final time.
In truth, we considered. Yes, we did, all this long ago. We just needed one of us to speak of it.
The emerald behemoth leapt up into the air.
It was only chance that it happened here, barely after you arrived. I apologize for that, young Kalak.
And then there remained only Alexstrasza and him.
Fare you well, Kalak. I'm sorry that you came all this way for only a few empty moments, and such a turn of events as you certainly did not expect or deserve to be confronted by.
With that, the Great Red took off, leaving a speechless Kalak to watch as the three vanished among the dark clouds, enshrouding not only the wastes, but nearly all of the bleak continent of Northrend. What happened here? The Blue asked himself over and over. What just happened here? For a brief time, Kalak had thought that things might be taking a turn for the better when he had agreed to stay in Dalaran, and as the mage Khadgar suggested, join the Kirin Tor. But soon, Kalak had seen the distrust in the eyes of the other magi. He was a blue dragon. That was all that mattered to them. In the end, he had made excuses to Jaina, citing the need to oversee the Nexus's crumbling defensive spells and gather its substantial and powerful collection of artifacts together. Kalak had actually looked forward to this gathering, hoping for some encouragement on several fronts. His own dragonflight had all but fallen apart. With the debacle concerning the focusing iris and its theft, he had felt that he had failed in every regard as a leader, and that had led to the mass exodus of the other blue dragons. The Nexus had become a place of emptiness, and at times Kalak had found himself without the inclination to truly fight the departures. Now the ones to whom he had desperately sought to turn had themselves turned from the world. A further irony was that despite wanting to come here, Kalak had considered not making the journey. He had been ashamed at his failure to find the focusing iris and the dreadful events that had come to pass because of that, especially the destruction of Jaina's own realm of Theramore. Kalak had at first not wanted to admit his humiliations to those who had considered him their equal, despite the incredible difference in age and experience. Yet in the end, Kalak had chosen to come, only to find himself in this new debacle. I thought Theramore was in Deepholm. Didn't realize it was Jaina's realm. I could totally be wrong on that. But I would still be okay, because that would be Cataclysm time. A chill ran down his spine that had nothing to do with the elements. The blue dragon looked back at Wyrmrest Temple, once a place of legend to him. Now he suspected that he was staring at it, if not for the last time, then likely the next to last. Without the Accord, there was only one reason to come to this dark land, and that was to die. But for all his misery, Kalak was not yet ready for death. His youth might be a key factor in his failures, but it also urged him on, even if he had no idea what to do next. Kendon. Ooh. Sorry about that. That is a very distinct beep. I had the oven on, but every now and then my oven will malfunction. It hasn't happened in a while, in a few months, but when it does, it'll make this weird beep, and then it's like a warning beep that somehow it is spiked to like 600 degrees, and it will instantly roast anything. I was making burritos, so hopefully those are pretty dense. Hopefully I just saved it and I'm not going to be eating a burnt burrito here later on. All right. Where was I? Yeah. So it said his youth might be a key factor in his failures, but it also urged him on, even if he had no idea what to do next. The wind picked up its rush through the temple, creating a surreal howl that finally stirred the blue to begin his own departure. With a beat of his wings, he rose high. Once airborne, the urge to be far from Wyrmrest magnified. Kalak focused on the direction home and increased his pace. But just as he left Wyrmrest behind, something nagged at his senses. Although no longer an aspect, Kalak was still a blue dragon, and thus more attuned to arcane magic in all its varied forms. The trace was so unique that despite his mood, Kalak sought out its source. But a first glance at the landscape below failed to give the dragon any clue as to where it lay. Concentrating, Kalak managed to better pinpoint the general area. The catastrophe in the temple momentarily forgotten, the Blue descended for a closer look. His path took him over the remains of more than one dragon. Despite the preservative qualities of the constant cold weather, the wind and the other elements eventually wore away all recognizable traces of the dead. Even those already reduced to bone would someday not even be recognizable for the massive, proud beasts that they had once been. After what had happened in the temple, the finality of the scene below struck him anew, but he continued down, despite misgivings. And then at last he sensed from where exactly the magical emanations originated. Calic veered in that direction and came to a jarring halt in the air. So stunned was he by what he beheld that it was all he could do to remember to keep flapping his wings. It was perhaps its gargantuan size that had permitted the skeleton to remain nearly intact after so very long, yet almost as arresting as its incredible dimensions was the angle at which it lay. Nearly all the other frozen remains scattered through the vast, isolated region lay as if those dragons had simply gone to sleep. Indeed, most had done so, just landing with the aid and comfort of others of their kind, breathing their last with relatively little suffering. Not so this mammoth creature. This Leviathan had died violently, and so in the bloody process had many, many others. The cracked muzzle of the skull revealed part of a huge maw that could have engulfed Calic. The lower jaw was nowhere to be seen. The neck twisted in an awkward manner that revealed just how devastating the collision with the ground had been. The torso too lay violently twisted, the spine arched at an impossible angle. The half-buried ribs formed a winding tunnel that rivaled the great chambers of the temple in height. Within that macabre passage, Calic pinpointed the location of the mysterious emanations. The dragon shuddered, feeling a sense of dread. Then, steeling himself, the blue Leviathan dived in among the gigantic frosty bones. Dived in among the bones of the father of dragons, Galakrond. So I wonder if we're going to hit the thing yet. The premise of this story is the story of that battle of Galakrond and the original fight that the aspects had to do to defeat him, because he was the original like OG evil on Earth, probably the first major evil, maybe even before the old ones came, the old gods. But so how that happened, I believe, and this was a long time ago when we read that story, almost like a year ago. But I think when we read that story, even then I was like, that would make a cool story. So clearly Richard A. Knack here, who's number 2, I would say. Christy Golden's definitely the most prolific of the Warcraft writers, but this guy's second. But he seems to be very pigeonholed into this universe and dealing with the dragons, which is okay. It's a rich story. All right, cool. We got another episode in the pipe, 5x5. As always, I thank everybody so much for watching, for listening, and I will see you next time on Lore of Warcraft.